Hi again, guys. We are going to talk about Newton's third law, the last of his three laws of motion today. So just as a reminder, the first law, Newton basically focused on inertia. What happens if there is no force acting on a particular object, or if all the forces acting on the object cancel each other out? So that zero net force is on that object. That was the first law. And what we saw, according to first law, is that an object in motion will stay in motion, an object at rest will stay at rest, right? Very famous of the three laws. Everyone can state that. They may not know it's first law, but it is. Second law, then Newton would say, okay, let's say that we do have a force acting on a particular object. What will that force cause that object to do? And what we learned was that if you apply an unbalanced force to an object, Newton said that is going to cause an acceleration, a change in the motion of that object. If it was at rest, it's all of a sudden going to start gaining some velocity. If it had a velocity, that velocity would change. All right? So the effect of a force is to cause acceleration. And the fact that that acceleration depended upon not just how big the force was, but also how much mass that the object had. So that was second law. In the third law, what Newton discovered is anytime he looked or thought about forces acting on an object, that those forces always existed in pairs. So that there was an action force and a reaction force. All right? Those pairs were always equal in magnitude, but opposite in direction. And so we can write Newton's third law. If we paraphrase it a little bit, what we would say is that the third law basically tells us for every action, and I mean, this basically means, oops, not a P, that's an F. For every force, all right, or every action, there is an opposite reaction. So we're going to spend a lot of time today, and again, you could say if an action is a force, a reaction is also a force. So we're going to look at a lot of examples of these today, but just to get us started, I'd use something really simple, and hopefully you've never done this, but maybe you got mad at something and you punched the wall. Well, you're applying a force to the wall. You punched it, you pushed on that wall. But what's the wall do in return? Well, if all I did was apply a force to the wall, my hand wouldn't hurt. All right? If you punch the wall, that wall, it's going to hit you back, essentially. If you run into something, that object that you run into, you apply a force to it, but it applies a force also to you. So I think one of the easier examples here is to look at a batted baseball. So we're going to look at a batted baseball here in just a second, and we're going to talk about the forces that exist on it. So here we have an example of one of Newton's action-reaction pairs, as he called them. So in this case, as the batter swings this bat, there's going to be contact made between the ball and the bat. And so what I would say first is the bat is going to apply a force to the baseball. How do I know? How do I know the baseball would have a force applied to it in this case? Well, what I would see is the ball, number one, is going to change directions. It also, more than likely, is going to change its speed. And so I'm getting an acceleration. Remember that anytime you apply a force to an object, it will have a change in its velocity or an acceleration. So that is the action force. But at the same time that you hit that ball, the ball is also going to apply a force to the bat itself. How would I know that is happening? Well, if you've ever hit a softball or a baseball with a bat, you know that you can feel when you hit the ball. The bat actually will slow down. Why does it slow down? Because you're applying, the ball is applying an equal force to the bat, and that force is in the opposite direction that the bat was moving. And so you're going to make that bat slow down. That's what happens when you apply a force in the opposite direction that you're moving in. So we're going to get an acceleration both in the ball and in the bat because we had an action force, bat on ball, and a reaction force, ball on bat. They're in opposite directions but of equal magnitude, just like Newton would say. So as the title said here, your action-reaction pair, those two forces, are equal but opposite. But the important thing to recognize here is they don't act on the same object. So as this catcher that's in the picture catches this ball, we know the catcher has to apply a force to the ball to make it stop. Again, we know that because if the ball is going to come to a stop, it's accelerating. It's having a negative acceleration, slowing and stopping, but it is accelerating. So we know there's a force applied to the ball. That means, according to Newton and his third law, there's also a force applied to the catcher. Now, how do I know that those two forces aren't both applied to the ball? Well, remember, they're equal but opposite forces. If they're both applied to the ball, then those two equal but opposite forces would cancel each other out, leaving no force at all acting on the ball. So what's an object with no force acting on it going to do? It just continues on. It's an object in motion. It's going to continue on at the same speed right through the catcher's glove, right through the catcher's body, and continue on into space forever, essentially. So those forces have to act on different objects. The force, one force acts on the ball, the other force is going to act on the catcher's glove. All right, so this is something important with every example of an action-reaction pair. They always act on different things. So here in our first example of our action-reaction forces, we're going to look at an auto accident. Notice that when these two cars collide head-on, that you have force applied to both cars. So the silver car applies a force to the red car. That's going to dent up the hood and break pieces off. But at the same time, the red car is applying a force to the silver. So there's your action-reaction pair. Ends up damaging both cars. Here's another example of an action-reaction pair. The cannonball is going to get pushed out of the barrel of this cannon by force, but it's going to exert an equal but opposite force on the cannon. Notice the cannon. So action-reaction. These boxers are going to be action-reaction pairs. If you think about it, if one boxer punches another one, he's going to apply a force to the other boxer, but the other boxer applies the same force back on him. So the harder that you hit your opponent, the harder your hand is going to feel that force from your opponent's face. So that's why they're wearing gloves, not to protect the other guy, but instead to keep them from breaking their hands. A rocket launch is another great example of an action-reaction pair. The rocket is going to apply force downward into the atmosphere by throwing gas out, but the return reaction force propels the rocket upward. The Earth and Moon are action-reaction pairs. The Earth exerts gravitational force on the Moon, pulling it towards Earth and maintaining its circular motion. But the Moon also exerts a force on the Earth. How do we know? Well, it makes our tides. We wouldn't get tides without that reaction force of the Moon. And finally, the last example is simply you walking. When you think about walking across the ground, you don't apply a force to yourself to move forward. You basically push backward. Think about walking, you're pushing backward on the ground. It is that reaction force that moves you forward. So the ground applies a force to you. So that was Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction. And Newton only did 3 laws, so we've been over all 3 of them. It's amazing the applications and the examples that Newton's laws explain. More than 350 years ago, he came out with these, and they're still relevant even today. So again, that's Newton's laws. We'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.